Over the last 2 years, the Taliban has remained in control. We've seen a somewhat deteriorating, society. We've seen them re-implement a number of restrictions towards women, education, as well as, appearance-based restrictions.
Right.
And then we've also seen, as expected, an increase in terror activity, and we're, still learning the effects of, what comes with the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan again.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined this week by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, we're now seeing 2 years of Taliban control of Afghanistan. What are we seeing in terms of that country and both what's on the ground in Afghanistan and also the degree to which the Biden administration has acknowledged?
As you mentioned, we're now at the 2-year anniversary point of the Taliban coming into Kabul and essentially overthrowing the U.S.-backed Ghani government as the U.S. was preparing to leave militarily. Over the last 2 years, the Taliban has remained in control. We've seen a somewhat deteriorating, society. We've seen them re-implement a number of restrictions towards women, education, as well as, appearance-based restrictions.
Right.
And then we've also seen, as expected, an increase in terror activity, and we're, still learning the effects of, what comes with the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan again.
So the Biden administration was relatively quiet about this anniversary. They tend to prefer to focus on the conclusion of the Afghanistan war, which officially happens closer to the end of the month. But there's been a lot of scrutiny of the Biden administration's actions in the Afghanistan withdrawal, especially since Republicans took control of the House.
That's exactly right. It's important to remember, I know it's been 2 years, but the U.S. was, planning to withdraw in a very orderly fashion, and then all of that planning, went to the wayside when the Taliban not only started their offensive, but very quickly and very easily dismantled, an army that had U.S. weapons and U.S. training, and so the Taliban came into the country and it threw everything, all of the planning out the window. The U.S. launched its non-combatant evacuation, where they tried to get as many Americans and as many Afghan allies out as possible. And while they did it, perform this under, literally dire, consequences and dire situations around them, there were thousands left behind as well.
Right.
And so this is not a good look. It wasn't a good look for the administration then. It wasn't a good look for them on the 1-year anniversary, and it's not this time around either. One of the big differences, as you mentioned, is that the House is now under Republican control. So we've seen the House Foreign Affairs Committee in particular really start to try and not only investigate, but really get some of the answers of the big questions that have been left unanswered, that the administration isn't eager to answer themselves.
So we've been talking for a while about Senator Tommy Tuberville's holds on Pentagon promotions in protest of the abortion travel reimbursement policy. But now we're seeing some real effects of his position, of his holds. What are we seeing? Where are we seeing some vacancies that are really starting to matter a bit?
So, in the grand scheme of things, Senator Tuberville has held up, more than 300 promotions or nominations. And, the Senate leadership does have a way to get around it, but it's a much more arduous process that it's not how they usually do it. So they've actually refrained from that. But so Senator Tuberville's hold has actually resulted in 3 of the 8 positions on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which are, a leader from each service branch that reports, to the chairman, who reports directly to the president. And so of these 8 positions, the head of the Army, the head of the Navy, and the head of the Marines are now in an acting capacity because the leaders of each service branch retired, and they are term limited out. And, the Senate has not yet confirmed their successors. And so in multiple cases, the successor is, the person who President Biden selected is the person in the acting capacity because they were the number 2. And so now those people who were the number 2 are now doing that same job while also taking on the acting number 1. And so it's not necessarily a sustainable process because you have, leaders who are not yet, they don't even have access to everything that the number one does. They're just being asked to do the number one job, in addition to their very busy job as the vice chief of the army, vice chief of naval operations, and vice marine commandant.
So finally, Ukraine has started doing more attacks on Russia, but Russia has had some success doing what?
Stopping those attacks. And so over the last couple of weeks, we've really seen a more aggressive Ukraine in trying to launch attacks on Russian soil. And we know that that's been a big line for the United States over the last 18 months of war. The U.S. has said, very publicly and repeatedly that they do not want to enable attacks on Russian soil because they're worried about a possible, escalation, even in the mind of Russia.
Don't want to get dragged into the war.
Exactly. And so the U.S. has, not enabled these attacks. However, we have seen, a number of drone attacks on Russian soil, in Russian proper, and even, close to Moscow. That being said, most of these attacks have been thwarted and are not, they're not posing much risk to Russian civilians, but it shows just one aspect in which, the situation on the ground has changed. And, it comes at a time when we're seeing what pretty much has amounted to a stalemate in recent months.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.